Hello, everyone. I apologize for the delay. So let's begin with the webinar. We welcome you in today's webinar organized by Funds for NGOs. Today's topic is negotiating with donors, the art of the deal. I am Anutma, your moderator, and I'm excited to guide you through this session. Thank you all for making time to participate in this webinar. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, which include a 45 minutes of presentation, followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A option on your webinar screen to post your question, and we will respond to them during the Q&A session. Thank you once again for joining us. Let's dive in with the webinar's objective. The first objective is to help participants to understand the principles and practices of negotiating with global donor agencies and institutions, to assist participants to apply effective negotiation tactics to secure favorable contract terms, whilst building viable donor relationships, to guide NGOs on how to align their organization's needs to meet the expectation and our requirements of different donors to create mutually beneficial alliances, to create a platform upon which NGO leaders can participate in discussing an effective donor negotiating strategy. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available in the video section of the Funds for NGOs premium website. And now allow me to introduce today's trainer, Dr. Christopher A. Johnson. Dr. Christopher is an award-winning journalist, editor, publisher, and business management consultant since the 1980s. He is also a former Commonwealth Nuffield Cambridge Press Fellow, Management Science Fellow, a certified Commonwealth Youth Worker, holder of an MBA in Marketing Management and a doctorate in Business Management. He is renowned for his visiting tutorials in bid writing, business planning, leadership, marketing, and organizational development cum capacity building. He is both founding director of Global Entrepreneurial Development Services Limited and chair of Community Education Academy of Leadership. He supports economic and social policy initiatives in Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and South Asia. Now, I kindly request Dr. Christopher to lead the session and share screen.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, and welcome participants to another webinar session looking at a very important topic here. And we are looking at negotiating with donors, the art of the deal. I know the art of the deal sounds very familiar to some of you, if not all of you, but it's really about how to negotiate with funders, how to prepare your organization, how to have the right kind of attitude as well, but also understanding the expectations of donors. And so today we will be focusing on how to define negotiation, what that means. We would be looking at the features of donor negotiations, profiling the different types of donors and how they impact on your organization, looking at the questions that donors usually ask NGOs, because there are so many questions that they ask, the art of actually dealing with donors, what are the success rates of NGOs involved in negotiating tactics, the cultural sensitivity of donors, the do's and don'ts, and more importantly, the donor negotiation strategy. So let's get into the second slide, which refers to the negotiations and what negotiation actually means. Negotiation is really a sort of partnership. It's a process. Some people describe it as a system, but it's really an art. It's a science involving two or more people. So if there's an issue, a conflict, or a problem, the two or more parties come together, they look at the issues, they analyze those issues soundly as much as they can. They do it reasonably. And so you need to be patient, you need to be focused, you need to be disciplined when you're negotiating deals. It's just having a conversation, but you have to know exactly what is it you're talking about as well. And so on this platform, we are delivering this program to you, but we're also negotiating with you because we are trying to persuade you, instruct you, and guide you into understanding the different concepts regarding negotiations or negotiating. So this is really the definition that is given, and you would see there it resolves conflicts, it creates chances as well, and more importantly, it helps all parties to be satisfied with what is happening in respect of the organizations. But there are also features that are involved in donor negotiation, and these features vary. So, as I said in my opening remarks, donors need to understand what you're interested in as an organization. They need to know about your mission statement, your objectives, your outcomes, your outputs. Who are your participants? Who are your service users or clients? What expectations do you have for your organization, and why do you need the funding in the first place? So it's very important to understand the interests of the donors in terms of the amount of funding they have available, the deadline or the end line, for example, and why is it they're funding you in the first place? And all of those things are tied into relationships. We talk about relationships as though it's a marriage or a divorce or or as an engagement process, but relationships with funders are far more complex than that. It's about the personal, professional, and also the career ties that we have to funders. Because the more you deal with funders, the more you develop so many different types of relationships. Personal, professional, because you learn something about funding, you learn about project development, but you're also learning about the intricacies of funding, how to go about putting an application together, trying to understand what kind of partnerships arrangement you need to form from time to time. And then central to all of these would be your negotiating. How do you negotiate a contract? Well, you have to be compromising. You have to be able to give and take. In today's world at the moment, people are not empathetic, but you need to know how to put your feet in another person's shoes, as it were. So it's very important to learn to compromise. Compromise is not a weakness, it's a strength because it's a trade-off. Flexibility. Again, we are flexible on this platform because of you guys, men and women who are trying to acquire information. So we have to be flexible in the way we present information as clear as we can. Donors are also interested in long-term value. So they might give funding for about 6 months to a year, but they're also looking at what plans NGOs have in place for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because they are in it for the long haul. So they're interested in that. And they want to know what is it you're proposing? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And how will it affect people? How will it affect a village, a district, a city, a region, a country? How will it affect the global environment in which we live? And do you have systems in place, accountability? And how does your project link with donors' expectations as well as their own policies and programs. And then, of course, constraints, problems. Donors may have issues with the way funding is offered to them. It could be a subvention or a grant that is given to them by government. Instead of coming out in March, it comes out in April. You may want your project to be funded in time for May, for example, or in time for the summer, August. But you need to understand again the difficulties funders have as well, because nothing is finite until you actually get the funding. Follow up. This is something I tell clients every day. Always communicate, not just texting, but speaking to people live, emailing them, making sure that they feel good, develop a sense of trust, a sense of surety. And once you begin to do that, funders will certainly be in a position to help you from time to time. So these are, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, these are key features of donor negotiation that we need to observe from time to time. This slide is quite interesting because what it suggests is that you have several types of donors, and they look for organizations that have volunteering or what is called in-kind support. And then you have on the third right-hand side of the screen at the top, the yearly average donation that they give, and then you have the impact that those donations have or the funding has on the organization. So from an individual standpoint, we're talking here about someone who has money to give away, someone who wants to donate to a particular NGO. That person will expect at least 70 to 75% of volunteering coming from that organization, which means that they would expect that you will be able to provide 25, they will provide probably 25% of the funding, and you will provide funding in terms of in-kind support. That is what they will expect. And of course, it shows there how much money they will give from time to time, $50 to $500, depending on the situation from time to time. And then, of course, you have your impact it will have on the NGOs. The impact will be interesting. Large donations sometimes would come from time to time, but mostly smaller donations tend to be given by individual donors. Corporate donors would be your multinational corporations, your oil companies, your tobacco companies, your food companies, your agricultural production companies. They will probably provide as much as 10,000 to a million, but they will ask in return that you give or you include in your funding plan 5 to 10% volunteering costs, which makes a lot of sense. And obviously they are funding projects as part of their CSR or corporate social responsibility. When it comes to governments, government will provide funding for large or long-term projects. So it could be for 5 to 10 years. Sometimes they will start with 1 to 3 years to test how much you are in a position to spend. Do you have project management systems in place? Do you have a proper accounting and financial procedures in place? And they will expect that at least you have 15% or the maximum 20% of volunteering in kind cost built in. In terms of foundations, these are organizations that are set up to, like your Age Concern, Children in Need, Oxfam, and these are the large foundations, the Belinda and Melinda, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, the Zuckerberg Foundation that they have, all these foundations that donate lots of money per year to support small and large NGOs. And again, they're expected that you would include 5 to 10% volunteering in kind cost. And then you have your international donors, your World Banks, for example, the European Investment Bank, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank or ASEAN. You have the Caribbean Development Bank and the other banks that you have across the region and countries. And so they would expect you to provide at least 5 to 8% of volunteering costs because obviously they are funding large scale projects. And then you have some organizations that are involved in faith. So, for example, in the United States, you have lots of Christian philanthropists. In the Middle East, you have a lot of Muslim philanthropists. In India and other parts of South Asia, you have Hindu-based philanthropists as well as Sikh as well, Sikhs. And so they would provide funding for various community projects that are related to their particular faith or religiosity or religious beliefs. And so they expect again that you will provide a small amount of volunteering in kind cost, between 3 and 5%. And then you have crowdfunding, which is very a complicated form of funding. This is where local authorities or governments or even private donors will provide small donations from individuals, $20 here, $30 here, 1,000 rupees here, 5,000 CDs, here and there, 5,000 Kenyan shillings or Tanzanian shillings or Ugandan shillings here and there. And they would expect, of course, that you provide 2 to 5% of volunteering funding and cost. So this is certainly the profile of donors, and this is what they expect from you as an NGO organization or body from time to time. Okay, I mentioned a little while ago that donors always ask questions, and some of these questions you will find in your application. They may not necessarily be similar, but they would not necessarily be dissimilar either. In other words, one of the first things some organizations will be asked is, what is your mission statement? You know, and this is where you have to describe the purpose of the organization, what it is planning to do. In other words, briefly explain the scope of the organization. What is it trying to accomplish? What has it done? Its track record. That is very, very important to bear in mind. And then, of course, what type of project do you want to fund? So again, you have to scope your project. You have to look at the outcomes, the outcomes, the outputs as well. You have to quantify them, qualify them. You have to state exactly who are the people you're going to help to fund and what is your deadline. Is it 2 years, 3 years, 6 months, a year, etc.? And of course, your budget. You have to break down your budget into staff costs, insurance, pensions, for example, material costs, training costs, evaluative costs, premises hire, venue hire, and other relevant costs. And as I mentioned, what are the expected outcomes of the project? The number of people you hope to support and help. What is the impact of the project on various communities? How will you evaluate the project? This is something that NGOs struggle with. Many people ask me, for example, what kind of evaluation tools should they use? Well, I always say start with a questionnaire. A questionnaire. So, for example, when this webinar is completed, you'll be asked to fill an evaluation form, and that will give us an idea as to what is it you want, what is it you like about the webinar, etc. So always have a simple questionnaire and use that to evaluate or assess your outcomes and your outputs. Another question will be, how do you intend to use the funds? And this is where you have to break it down by budget, by cost, etc. What is your track record of experience? In other words, what have you done in the past? What are the successes of those projects? What have you learned from them, if any? And then in terms of transparency, this is where you have to make sure that you have a robust accounting and financial system in place, a proper recruitment selection process, an induction process for staff and volunteers. And then, of course, you have to make sure that you have competent people running the project. Do you need a project manager or project coordinator? Both are the same. Do you need a project administrator? Do you need volunteer supervisors, and do you need monitoring officers, etc.? And of course, what is your long-term plan for the project when the funding ends? Do you intend to continue elements of it, for example, or do you want to start another project? And risk management, how do you mitigate against risks? Risks to the environment, risks in terms of finance. So, for example, if the funding is reduced, would you still be able to deliver the project? Well, you can, but you might have to reduce your managerial costs and increase your volunteering input. You may decide to reduce the number of participants in order to be able to manage the project in terms of its outcomes. And then how do you plan to engage with groups of beneficiaries? How will they be involved in the assessment, planning, designing, marketing, and evaluating of the project? So these are very important questions. And I think, of all the webinars we've done so far, I think these questions are very pertinent, if not relevant, to every project that you do as an NGO. And so looking at the art of the deal here, very, very important. I think I skipped something there. The art of the deal here, we are looking at different types of NGOs. We're looking at their strategy, and we are looking at the considerations that donors tend to look at when it comes to negotiating. So for small NGOs, organizations that have just started or fledgling, probably a year or 2 years old, you have to make sure that you have very clear outcomes that are measurable. So you need to state exactly how many people you will provide a service or provide a support to. And one of the things donors would look at is whether you have resources that are limited. Do you have a long-term relationship with donors? They would look at that. For large NGOs, they would be looking at those that have capacity or capability. Can they manage projects properly? Could they meet their aims and objectives? NGOs that are involved in advocacy, these are NGOs that are working with government, advocating for change in young people's education, women's rights, advocating for charities to be given a better deal in the procurement system, or you might be advocating for changes in environmental policies, locally, nationally, or regionally, or internationally. So these are very important aspects of the work you do as an NGO. And of course, donors will be looking to see how impacting it is politically. And then you have your humanitarian NGOs that are dealing with natural disasters, environmental, social, faith-based research, arts, and culture. But as you would notice on the right-hand side of your screen, the last column, those considerations are key to understanding how to negotiate with donors. Because the donors have an interest in the work you do, but they want to make sure that you have systems in place to ensure that you can actually carry out your project to specification. This is just building upon the previous slide. What it is showing here is how donors tend to negotiate with NGOs that have certain skill sets and by type. So, for example, donors tend to support small NGOs that have 40 to 50% of negotiating skills. Large NGOs, it's more advocacy, it's about 60 to 70%. But what those percentages actually explain would be the type of skills that you need to negotiate with, management skills, be patient, culturally sensitive, understanding what the donors expect from you, etc., etc. And of course, there will be challenges to donors, donor negotiation. This is something that donors would look at, and this is something that you need to examine. So the challenges on your right-hand side of the screen are important to look at, and you will link that to your negotiating skills because challenges create opportunities in themselves. So if you are unable to balance the books, it means you need to understand accounting and financial systems. If you lack training, you need to develop them. If you don't know much about the environment, you need to read about it and probably attend crash courses or short courses on the environment and so on and so forth. This is a snapshot of major priorities of donors, donor agencies, and this is from the World Bank and other organizations. So in Africa, for example, there are 4 issues that they're looking at: humanitarian aid, environmental issues, health and education. In Asia, Asia here includes East Asia, South Asia, and West Asia. And so here they're talking about humanitarian aid as well, environmental issues, health and education, and other. The Latin American region, which includes the Caribbean as well, those are some of the percentage of aid that is offered to different organizations. Europe, 25% there for humanitarian, obviously, because they don't have much natural disasters except for floods, etc. And North America, which includes Mexico, Canada, and the United States, those are the percentages for different project areas. So this is just a snapshot of, again, how you need to understand how aid is distributed and how funding is also allocated for different projects from time to time. This is very important because, this is not something that we are taught at the university or colleges. We're not even taught at business schools, some of this. But this is something that I discovered working with different organizations in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And I felt it was important to also do some research and find out the kind of sensitivities that donors would expect from NGOs by different continents and regions. And so you look at the second, your second column, you would notice that those are very important issues: transparency and accountability. You need to be open, you need to be truthful, you need to provide factual information, and you need to account for every penny, every Deutschmark, every shekel, every shilling, every rupee, every dinero, every CD, every dollar and pound. You need to account for all of that. Human rights, very important indeed. Human rights simply mean respecting people irrespective of their gender, their sexuality, their occupation, their education, their caste or their tribe, whatever position they have in their society, in the community, they should be respected. Decision making, very important in all of this. What type of networks do you have with your partners in the public, private, and civic or civil society? And in the Middle East, respect for cultural traditions. I think this should be across the board, really. In fact, all of these cultural sensitivities are important and relevant for all NGOs across the world, because at some point you're going to be dealing with participants who have some of these characteristics and features. So these are some things that you need to bear in mind as you go along trying to support service users, etc. Do's and don'ts, very, very important. People tend to feel that, if you're negotiating with donors, you do what you want, you tell them what you want, and it's cool. Well, it is not cool because you need to know how to engage with donors before you put a proposal in. And the way you engage with them, you try to, as I said in previous webinars, you need to research donors, find out what makes them tick, what are their values, what do they respect, what are the things that they like to see, what is the language they use, what is the vocabulary, what are some of the projects that they've funded in the past and why. And be patient and try to understand. Because if you become impatient, which is a don't, if you become impatient and intolerant, you would not learn anything about donor funding. So you have to be patient. Your proposal also has to be aligned with the donor's goals and objectives, as we pointed out. Be realistic. You also have to be open. You talk about the needs of the project, which include the needs of the individuals. And again, build trust. Your terms and conditions must be clear. Read the details of the agreement carefully. As they say, read the fine print, and try to understand what the donor is requesting. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions and also write to get inquiries answered. Communicate clearly in writing, speech, even when you are arguing or disputing an issue, do it in a very sensible way. And of course, when you're closing the deal, show gratitude. Send a nice thank you letter expressing your gratefulness to the donor and wishing the donor well in supporting other organizations. And then, of course, set up long-term relationships. Make sure that you're always engaging with funders. Ask them to send you updates or information on funding trends, including projects, policies that are taking place in your city, your village, your district, or your town. Find out what's happening and always engage with your donors. And now we are coming almost towards the end of very, very important part of this presentation. And this is about the strategy that you need to have for negotiating with donors. And the first strategy, of course, or the first stage of your stratagem would be you need to make contact. And in making contact, you introduce what the NGO does, your mission. You have to research your donors, as I mentioned. That's key. And then your proposal, whatever you develop, must be aligned with donors' priorities. So the priorities this year might be early years education. It might be using sports to enhance the well-being of young people. It could be looking at digital technology for the elderly between 65 and 90 plus. Or it could be looking at micro to small business financing for the next 15 to 20 years. Or it could be developing a new vaccine to deal with health problems in the next 5 or 10 years. So all of these things you need to factor in. Relationship building, trust and confidence, very important. If there are meetings by donors, attend them. Attend webinars, attend physical seminars and workshops. Make sure that every month or every quarter, that's every 3 months, you attend a seminar and workshop to help you to develop your capacity and capability, because knowledge is power, power used wisely. Develop negotiating skills, skills of communication, writing, not just texting, but writing proper letters of introduction, because all of those relate to negotiating with donors. And when you secure funding, make sure that you confirm the funding, make sure that you tell everyone about the funding, your directors, participants, and have an opening launch of your project. Monitoring and evaluation, very important. Keep donors up to date of your project progress, even if things are not going wrong. Keep telling them how things are developing and even ask them for suggestions and continue to collect data, etc. And then, of course, scaling or extending your project. Do you intend to seek added funding or more funding? And how would you spread or disseminate project success? Would you just put it in a newspaper or a magazine, or would you do a fully fledged report with the findings and send it to the funders and other partners? And then in closing, you have what is called a final celebration, where you express thanks and gratitude and appreciation to your funders, your partners, their families, and other parties that are associated with your project. And so by and large, NGOs, this is really a definitive negotiation strategy, including the different stages you can actually include in your business plan or your strategic plan of action. And finally, this is just building on the strategy there. This is how you negotiate what you have to do. You develop or you cultivate your donors. You create awareness, you engage with them, you generate interest. And then you develop a relationship with them, and then you create a stewardship whereby you maintain those strategies and tactics. So this is certainly a presentation that I hope that you not only enjoy, but you will certainly go away and think about some of the things you need to do. These are some of the areas we discussed, as I mentioned at the beginning. And I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you've enjoyed this session today, as we have as well. And thank you for listening. And at this time, I'd like to avail myself to any questions you wish to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for insightful presentation. Participants, now we will take your questions. The first question is, what is volunteering? Is it like co-financing? And give a few examples of what volunteering in kind cost might be.
Yes, volunteering is not co-financing. Co-financing is really complementary financing. So, for example, if you have a project costed at $50,000 or £50,000 or rupees or shillings, and you don't have sufficient funding, you may just have 25,000. You can get another organization to co-finance, or you could have two other organizations putting 12,500 each. And so they would complement, not supplement, complement, which means they will provide equal share so that you can have your project up and running. So that's the difference between volunteering and co-financing. Volunteering simply means providing time. So for example, if the project coordinator is allocated 5 hours a day to deliver a project in terms of project management, he or she can decide to spend another 3 hours on the project. Another 3 hours could be to look at how the project is being monitored by the training officer, looking at the kind of funding that is allocated for that particular day, visiting different venues to find out how participants feel. And that has to be costed. It could also be costed at probably 15 or 20 pounds per hour, similar to how it will be costed if, when actual funding is given. I hope I am somewhat clear in my communication, but there is a distinction between volunteering, as I said, and co-financing. So when you're volunteering, you cost the project for that person or persons as if the persons are actually being paid to do the job, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is major donors typically engage through referrals or open calls, leaving little room for direct communication. They also tend to discourage unsolicited emails. In such a scenario, how can we effectively build relationships with donor and position ourselves for a successful bid?
Well, the first thing that struck me there was discouraging unsolicited emails. Now, I don't know how true that is because what you need to do, I think, is sometimes the language we use, the words we use. Because if a donor or a funder receives information which says, "Dear funder, we have been established for the last 10, 15 years, and we would like to inquire when your funding round begins or starts," that is not being unsolicited. What you're doing is a polite inquiry. So I think it is the kind of wording that is used sometimes that creates the problem. Because donors are very sensitive people. And if you use words or language that has some sort of imposition or bullying effect, they will not comply. They'll rebuff you. In terms of constructive relationships, again, funders have funding fairs. Some of them have programs online. But you need to understand how funders work. And that is what I said in my remarks. You need to understand their sensitivities, in other words. It is not about what you want, it's about what you need as an NGO. And therefore, you need to be able to work with the funders in order to get a result. Don't think that you are special because all of us are special, including the funders. So try and be polite as much as you can. Don't use your culture as a practice, but be polite, be professional. And I think funders will certainly recognize that and they will support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The next question is how the international donor type can be approached. Is it only via the given call for proposals?
Yes and no. The call for proposal sometimes given, sometimes too late, sometimes it's given 2 weeks before, a month before. I don't know why funders do that, but sometimes they have issues too with funding being allocated for them as well. So you have to bear that in mind. I would say that you can approach them in different ways, not just waiting for the call for proposal, but you could inquire. So at the beginning of the financial year, which is Some countries it's January to January, other countries are from January to March or thereabout, or March to March or March to April. But again, you need to find out that to know when funders would issue a call for proposals. Only you can find out that. But what I would say is keep in touch and find out what's happening from time to time. I know in some countries it can be confusing, but that there is where you have to be very careful, use your initiative, be patient, speak to people in government, in your local authority area, and I'm sure that they will give you guidance from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The next question is: do the America First policy decisions and the halt of US aid influence international agencies to reduce their funding to the other countries?
I can hear the smile in your the, well. Yes and no. I think these are very tough decisions that have to be made by politicians and administrations, but we also have to be tough on ourselves and say, you know what, we should not over rely on just external funding, but we must also look and see where we can access funding through our communities, through local areas, and how we could also better spend money that is given to us. Because sometimes NGOs tend to waste money. It's not something they do deliberately, but they don't know how to spend public funding. It's not something that you are trained to do. You could only do it through a period of time. I mean, I learned public funding when I was doing my MBA, but now they don't teach those subjects now. They don't. So you have to develop a set of skills through intervention, speaking to people, reading about it. Also try to look at alternative funding for different projects and try to adjust your organization's priorities to suit the type of funding that is involved. And this is where flexibility comes in, being able to adjust. In the next couple of weeks, of course, I'll be presenting an alternative funding to the USAID. So that information will be there. But for now, just look at where alternative funding is and just try to make use or maximize with. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Doctor. The next question is: we work in a competitive environment. In your opinion, how we could stand out from the other peer organizations in the approach towards donors?
Well, this is where collaboration is important. I've said repeatedly on this platform that NGOs need to collaborate. So, for example, if you're working with children, find a way to work with another NGO that is involved with children and young people. If you're working on health issues, try and work with other NGOs that are involved in children's, women's, and men's issues. If you are a faith-led organization, work with people from different faiths. Because if you don't do that, because NGOs are supposed to be leaders, that's what we are, leaders. And if we don't lead, we cannot blame the politics of the day because we are supposed to be leading from the front, really. So that is what I would say: collaborate, partner, create relationships, and that will help you. And be patient. Be very, very patient. And that is how you will succeed. Don't expect things will come to you just like that. You have to earn it. And that's the policy that NGO should adopt. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for your input. The next question is: how can a young NGO successfully break through, especially in proposal writing requirements, where it's having challenges to show evidence of previous financial statements or audits reports, being it's the first time for such an organization?
Yeah, so an NGO is new. One of the questions that funders will ask is that if you don't have a set of accounts, obviously you're trading for the first time, you need to produce what is called projected income and expenditure. So, you should know, for example, what the organization is estimated to receive in terms of revenue, and this is where your planning is concerned. So if you have a business plan or if you have a strategy in place, you will know, for example, what monies are required for that organization for a year. So you just put an estimate there and you indicate very clearly in the application that we don't have we don't have a track record of funding, but we expect or we plan to accrue or to secure, X amount of dollars, pounds, rupees, as the case might be. And I think that's the way to do it, because most funders tend to look at two types of organizations. One, the organizations that are experienced, but also organizations that are new, but are also coming with something completely different. Okay, so don't see your newness as a disadvantage, see it as an advantage. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. The next question is there any example of indicators if your fundraising channels are effective or successful?
Yes, again, your evaluation would be very important. So what you should do from time to time is do an internal evaluation of your organization. Questions such as, how many engagement sessions did I attend or did we attend? What was the feedback by the different persons who spoke at that function? What is the potential for funding from the funders that presented, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, what type of funding are they looking for? So once you do that sort of internal evaluation and you process that, you can then use that to include that information in your application. So, for example, like heritage projects, they would ask you, have you spoken to someone in the Heritage Fund? Have you spoken to organizations regarding your project? And if you haven't spoken to them, why? And if you have, what did they tell you? You know? So these are some of the things that you need to do from time to time. But have a constant engagement with donors and even non-donors as well. Speak to people, communicate with them rather than just merely texting them.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. One participant is saying, thanks for very clear ideas about the negotiation with the donors. Very clear. What kind of focus areas are prioritized by the donors aligning the context?
The priorities are so much. I would say the major priorities would be, making sure that your project is clearly defined, the aims, the objectives, your outcomes, outputs. Also, who are the people going to be involved in managing the project and administering it? Do you have accounting and financial systems in place? Those are very important. And then what do you hope to accomplish when the project comes to an end? Those are some of the salient points or questions that you need to ask yourself, because those are the questions that are in the application anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is, how do we best approach the issue or question of sustainability that most donors ask about in project proposals?
Yes, well, there are so many different practices that you can gain. I mean, one of the things I would say is to look at what the World Bank is saying about countries and sustainability. You can read their reports. You could also read reports from various environmental organizations. For example, like the World Health Organization, the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, PAHO as well, the Pan American Health Organization, and even what the governments are saying within your own country. They have environmental strategies. Look at them, read them, study them, and look at where the gaps are within your own organization. So, for example, on carbon emissions, find out in your organization how much electricity you use every month, for example. You can look at the bills, for example, how much water that you use. All of those things. What type of resources do you use for the most part? And then you use that information to come up with an environmental plan. So, for example, some people have a way of just turning off the computer without signing out, you know. They just shut it down like that. And when you do that, it creates a trigger. So these are some of the little things that you need to account for. How much paper do you use on a daily basis? And that sort of thing. So those are some of the factors you need to consider when you're looking at an environmental strategy, and how many people, for example, walk or use bicycles or other forms of transport that are less carbon emissionite. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Doctor, for your input. Participants, due to time limitations, we cannot cover all the questions posted here. As now we have reached the end of the webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your active participation. On behalf of the entire team, we would also like to thank Dr. Christopher for his invaluable insights. Participants, please take a moment to fill out the feedback form for today's session. Your input is crucial in helping us improve. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us at support@fundsforngos.org. The feedback form will appear on your screen in a moment. Once again, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Christopher, and to all the participants. We look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.
You're most welcome, and good day or good evening to all of you. And thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.